Alright, welcome to EVE Online, I'm Major Freak. So, more grid foo. So I think I'm able to repro this confidently. Say you warp to a fob with a pod, and you get the bookmark, and when you warp to check the bookmark, you warp from the pod, from the pod in your pod to your set bookmark. It all works. You can still see the fob. Great. It's about 5,000 from it. That I remember, if I can remember correctly. You warp off, get in your ship, undock, warp to your crew, warp everybody to that bookmark, and bam, it's not on grid. You're like, oh man. So I'll start. I think I should do it more often because I've been using an alt to get the non-squad leader to get the bookmark, and then I wait there while my squad leader warts everybody there, and no issue. And it hasn't been an issue ever. Well, there's a few cases that I screw it up, and it's off grid for me. But what's happening, I think, after so many screw ups of, not having it on grid, I think that when I warp to the fob using my squad leader in the pod, I get there, I've set the bookmark under 10,000 kilometers, I warp back to the bookmark, still on grid with the fob. I'm like, cool, and then I warp away from the fob, and then I get in my ship and I warp to my crew, and then I warp everybody to that bookmark. What I think it's doing is it's resetting where the grid is when I leave the grid. And that's something new. It should have been something I had on my mind, but I hadn't. So my past thinking was, all right, so I warped the grid, it's on grid, great. As soon as I warp to the fob, it's resetting because there's nothing else on grid. So as soon as I'm in warp, it's going to just be as though nobody's there. Mainly because when you read the PDFs and stuff about grid foo, it seems to indicate that as long as you have something else other than you on the grid, then it'll hold it open. But, and that's what I had. As you were a null factor, basically. I hadn't been thinking that you yourself were holding the grid open. I should have, but I didn't. So, in effect, I'm sure others have discovered this long ago and probably tried to explain it, but the documentation had been so shitty, I didn't understand it, or maybe it's just me. I'm just dumb. Anyway, so I warp to the grid, get my bookmark, I'm on grid. Nothing else is on grid with me. I warp back to my bookmark, and I hold the grid open. When I warp away, the grid resets, of course, to a null factor. Get on my ship, go to the squad, I warp to that bookmark right now, and the grid thinks, okay, you just warped to this spot, is there anything else on the grid with you? And it checks, and it goes, no, because it's dumb, and the fob's on the other grid. So there's a grid wall. There's, now that I've got somebody here, it's going to hold the grid open forever. I have to get my crew off this grid. Now, what I'll do is I'll simulate. I'll get a bookmark on my. That's not going to work. Let's see. I'll get rain. All right. So rain's going to do it. So let's see. Warp everybody off.
Warp drive active.
And I'm going to simulate rain. Now, the working hypothesis so far is that if I take rain, I get in the pod, I warp to the fob, and then back to this bookmark in my pod, I should still be on grid with the fob, and then I will get everybody else to warp to me, and then I can go get my ship, rain ship. That's the working theory. So not only does something else hold the grid open, but you yourself also holds the grid open. And that would explain a lot of the mysteries of grid foo that I didn't even know the questions to. So we've got an answer. We just start walking back and reverse engineering to find the questions, which are in themselves interesting. Because if you know the mechanic better, you can understand the way to manipulate it better, right? So just leave ship. Let's see if I can repro it.
Warp drive active.
And there you go. And there you go. So before, there was an open kind of mystery, because sometimes I would warp to a ping and then warp my guys to the ping, and as they're in warp and nobody's landed yet, I warp off the pod to pick up my ship and get ready to join my guys, and I'm off grid. I'm like, what the hell? And I knew back then that I was holding the grid open with my ship when I wasn't in warp. But I think the key misunderstanding of mine was that, once I'm in warp, once I enter warp, I'm a null factor, and the grid ignores anybody in warp, right? It just was a misconception. So even if you're in warp, you will hold the grid open while you're on grid. So I'll actually do a demonstration of that. So it was fine, right? So we'll get you to stay here. Warp everybody back.
Warp drive active.
So they'll bugger off, and I'll do the exact same thing, but while they're in mid-warp, I'll go get my pod. I mean my ship, sorry. And the interesting thing is, if the working theory is correct, I won't be able to warp, even with this ship, I won't be able to warp to this bookmark and have this be visible. I'll just show you right now. So say I warp off, get my ship, and come back to this bookmark in order for the others to warp to me. You know, because of, say I'm here way early. I'm like, I might as well sit on the bookmark. Because this character, the system will not remember me as being on the grid with the fob when I come back, even with the pod. So we'll warp back in the pod, just in case people think, well, since you're in system, you haven't had a session change, could the system remember you being on grid? That's a long shot, but I'd like to eliminate all the questions, right? All the possible questions. Because I've got to prove my working hypothesis is a working theory. Like it's a theory now. And that way I can start the whole misunderstanding of the holy trinity, quote unquote, when I assumed that prices for plex extractors and skill injectors were in lockstep, right? And that was a huge mistake in assumption. So I'm still on grid. Okay. Why did it remember? It shouldn't remember. Why is it remembering? As soon as I left both grids, it should have just... And there's nobody cloaked watching me. Like the system is... There's nothing else here. And it won't recognize bookmarks, obviously. So, why did it remember? Okay, weird. This is weird. Okay, so we're going to warp everybody to... What if I wait? Thought just hit me. What if I warp my guys to the person, and the person leaves? And what if I warp to the bookmark? Is there a difference? We're gonna try it. All right, so I remembered where it was, or at least I didn't change session, and it remembered where it was. What if these guys can see it now, and they'll remember? But I'm warping to a person, not a bookmark, right? I don't think... This is weird. Like, why would it still be on grid for him, for her? Okay, that's weird. Why? So it's remembering that I'm on grid. What? Okay, let's try a session change. and assume that will clear that, right? So let's warp everybody back. Okay.
Warp drive active.
Interesting. Like, that's not what I expected at all. Like, I thought as soon as you left grid, it would just go reset, but it doesn't. Jesus. That's more complicated. Well, it might be simpler, but to me it seems complicated. So a change session, undocking. I'm not sure if I change session if I leave an upwell though. I might have to dock an NPC. Alright, so here we go. So change session, I think. If I still see the fob, I'll dock up at an NPC and do the same exact thing. And no, it's still in grid. Okay, that's weird. Okay, we'll try. Definitely session changing. All right, what's closest? You are. Not by much. All right. That is so weird. Was the fob on grid all this time, and I've been making a fool out of myself? I don't know. Pretty sure I didn't see it when I first warped in, when I started the video, right? Oh, goodness. All right, definitely session change now. Okay. But so originally I used my squad leader. I got to the upwell, I got in my pod, I undocked, warped the fob, got the bookmark at 5,000, warped back to it, or 4,000, 420. How weird, it's still there. What the fuck? Is the as long as one person has, as long as the system remembers? Okay, this is weird. All right, we'll give everybody. I'm sure it doesn't matter. I'm sure it's upwell or NPC, but I'm just gonna make sure. So maybe as long as one character has a memory of, or the system has the memory of the grid being still open at that range. So odd. Yawn.
Docking permission requested. Docking request.
All right, so
accepted.
everybody is session changing, so that should reset it. What the hell is your problem? There you go. Okay. All right. And I'll get my alts to talk up to, of course. All right. What the hell? Okay, so everybody has session change. We're good. All right. Do I have to change ship? that the thing? I mean, I think that's a little bit getting carried away there.
Docking permission requested. Docking request accepted.
I mean, I don't, like, I'm gonna have to cover all the bases until I don't see the, like, what the hell? It's gonna be annoying if I have to, come on. Bloody hell, it's still on grid. What the fuck? How is that even possible? Okay, I'm gonna have to go overboard with this just to force it. Like, is it the ship that's remembering? The only analogy I could think of is, you know, the POS force field password. It obviously isn't the same mechanic, but you know, I'm just, what the hell? Like, am I crazy? Start to doubt your own sanity. It's like, did I just not? Was it on grid and I just dirt the first time? Like in the beginning of the video? It's like, what the? Alright. So. Trying to do that. Like, do I have to actually shut down my computer? Or shut down the clients completely and restart the game for everybody in order to figure out what the hell? That'll be annoying. Alright, so everybody is in Corvettes now. Yeah, when I shut down the computer clients, I'll definitely check. I'll definitely check the beginning of the video before I start recording again. Jesus, what the hell? That is the weirdest thing. Like, you'd think it would be off grid. That's so bizarre. All right. So one is assuming I'm going to be off grid. Because how can it remember if it didn't in the first place, right? Okay, what the? All right, you're just getting annoying now. So. Right, shut down all the clients. Look at the beginning of the video. Obviously, spoiler alert, I won't see the fob in the beginning of the video because otherwise this will be a non-video. I won't even upload it. Okay, shutting down the other computers. Or clients, sorry. Alright, Jesus H. Oh, this should do it. Back in a bit.
A few moments later.
Alright, now we're back. Okay, so, I'll leave my ship. Do I need to just... Okay, so to do. What I'll do is just attempt to repro. So warp here. Okay. And warp there. So I've set the bookmark. I warp back to the bookmark. I'm still on grid. And what will usually happen is that I'll warp all my guys, and I'm assuming that I've reset it now. So I'm assuming that the off-grid will happen again. So we know that if I warp to this without having anybody on grid, I'll be off-grid again. So what I usually would do would be to warp everybody. Everybody's in warp. And then I go, okay, great, I can go get my ship now. So I'll warp off grid. And what will usually, will sometimes rarely happen is that when you do that and all your guys land, you won't be on grid with the fob. And I'm assuming that I won't be on grid because I checked the beginning of the video and the last video, and it totally had me off grid, right? So I'm assuming I won't be on grid. Oh, God, frick. So what the... How is that even possible? Like what? Well, that's annoying. I don't know. Like, what did I do to repair the grid? Because now it's just... ignoring any attempts to get... What the hell? I don't know. I'm just gonna blow this damn thing up. I wasted enough time. I was productive, but it's like, the hell? Yeah. The show on the road. Oh, one for boo. That is so bizarre. Like, how did I grid foo that it would ignore all session changes, including client shutdown, and not reset to the way it was before? Like, how is that even... Whoa, hey, guys, let's not fly away from each other. Alright. Like, how is that impossible? Like, once you fix the grid, it stays fixed. Till downtime? Yeah, it's like if you do something in the grid. So let's say you do total grid foo by using jet cans and totally expand the grid completely. And then after 2 hours, all the jet cans disappear. One assumes the grid foo will still be in place until downtime, because the system is remembering it. It's not remembering my spot in it, or that it's remembering that, oh yeah, this player or ship or whatever had kept the grid open. It's them who are keeping it open. No, it's not that at all. It's something on the server side going, the grid is now this from now on until downtime. It's gotta be it. Like, there's no other explanation, right? Well, there could be, but I just can't think of it. Jeez. And what I'll probably do is shut down this video and then watch how I fix the grid and see if something, like, I'll watch my first video in the third part and try to figure out how I fix the grid, and that might help answer, maybe bring up another question, maybe possibly an answer. I doubt it, but it'll hopefully bring up more questions. All right. Okay, now let's see now.
So, more grid foo.
Okay, so how did I fix it? So, I'm at the bookmark, can't see the fob. And I got the bookmark by warping to the fob, under 10k hit that, or assumed under 10k hit that bookmark. Got the bookmark, warped back to the bookmark, fob was still on grid, right? And I warped back to my ship, got into it, undocked, warped to my guys, and then warped everybody to the bookmark, and nothing. So how the hell did I fix it? Like, why wouldn't the act of simply warping from the fob to your bookmark would fix it? Because, you know, why? Alright, so I warp this guy off. Warp everybody. Everybody's in warp, okay. So everybody warps off the grid. Fuck up rain. I'm pretty sure I get in my pod, warp to the fob, and then warp to that bookmark. So I'm thinking I'm going to repro it. Do I try to fix it this session or try to repro the issue? This is a difficult thing with troubleshooting because you're trying to fix it, but at the same time you're going to repro what happened, and sometimes you get it mixed up. So do I good? Okay, I warp to, okay, good. So far so good. So hopefully I warp to the fob and then back to my bookmark, warp everybody, and then warp the pod off. Because otherwise I'll, quote unquote, fix the issue. But I'm trying to repro it at the same time, right? It's like, yeah. Unfortunately, I think I'd leave my guy on grid and therefore fix the issue. Unfortunately. And yeah, it'll answer it. It'll open up a couple more questions, but the fact I haven't been able to repro it is annoying. Okay, so I warp. Do I warp rain off? Do I warp rain away? Okay, so I'm troubleshooting, not reproing, unfortunately. So, yeah, okay, so if I'd gotten rain off grid right now, would it have reproed? Probably. I would still be off grid. So this is fixing it, but not reproing it. Okay. But once it's fixed and the grid has been grid food has been expanded, it'll remember till downtime. One assumes. So it's fixed. And then okay, warp everybody else. Leave you. But the grid is fixed now. So I'm warping back directly to the, and I'm assuming, okay, we fixed it, but now I warped up everybody off. So it's going to reset, but it doesn't reset. But if it doesn't reset, and if it's off grid, how can I warp to the fob and then back to the bookmark? Right? How can that even happen? Because it remembers, like, why can I fix it? How can I fix grid foo? 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 How can if the system recognizes two grids, right? How can I? Oh my god! How can I fix grid foo if it's even broken in the first place, right? Like, why? How can I fix it, right? Like, how could I have manipulated it in the first place when I was off grid? Well, I went there, was on grid. I warped to the bookmark. I was still on grid. I warped off. How can it go? Oh, you're off grid when you warp to it. Why? If you extended the grid there and you warped off, how could it reset? Right? How could it go? Okay, you're on grid, you warp to the bookmark, you're still on grid in your pod initially, then you warp off, get in your ship, go to your guys, warp everybody to the bookmark, and you're off grid. How does the system forget, but yet remember all this time, right? How can you, like, the missing question is, like, how can it forget that time, but remember all the other times after that, after you fix it somehow? Like, the way I fixed it was obviously when I warped my guys to the pod, who was still on grid with it, and then it goes, oh, like, how does it go? Okay, everybody's remembered, but when I tried session changing and everything else, it still remembered. Like, why did it forget that first time, right? Why did it forget that first time? That's the question. What I'd like to do is, eventually, when I find this situation again, is to try to repro it by how? By when I warped the pod to the fob, I could warp to the bookmark first, then warp to the fob, then warp back to the bookmark and warp everybody to that person or bookmark, and then warp the pod off. And then if that doesn't work, yeah. But yeah, it's trying to repro it with its slight adjustments to see what happens. Like, it's very confusing. But yeah, initially, it's off grid with me. So all I have to do is keep trying different things to keep that fob off grid with me, in order to slowly change parameters until I can successfully repro it, by doing the same actions, by warping to the fob, warping to the bookmark, and then seeing what combination of warps will set the system to remember instead of forgetting, like it did the first time, right? Good. Maybe somebody smarter than me can post in the comments, well, what the hell's going on. But yeah, it's so weird. Like, to be able to have the system remember so you can't repro it, that's just weird. Like, one would think once you left grid, it would just reset to the way it was. But how could I? Why wasn't my first act of warping to the fob, then the bookmark, fixing the grid? Right? Why did it forget? That's, again, the question, why did it forget? Yeah. I want to repro it and also try to figure out why did it forget. And those two questions are, well, one I have to do instead of fixing it, try to repro it and try to answer the question, why did it forget? That's my only clue, right? my guys are off to the next fob. What time is it? Jesus, gotta work today. All right.